A KXAN investigation reveals that 2 months after a deadly crash into an Austin hospital, the same hospital system had a near miss. This week, on Inside the Investigation, investigator Matt Grant explains the lengths the hospital went to try to stop a local law aimed at making medical facilities safer. Welcome to Inside the Investigation. Today I'm joined by my colleague, investigator Matt Grant. Matt, welcome to the show.
Kelly, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so Matt, before we get into your most recent investigation, briefly remind us of how we got here.
Yeah, so to get to where we are today, you have to rewind more than a year ago, February 13th, 2024. A drunk driver, we know from the toxicology reports, crashed into the front entrance, the lobby of St. David's North Austin Medical Center. The driver was killed, and 5 people were hurt in this incident, including the Bernard family. That sparked a $1 million lawsuit because the family alleged gross negligence on the part of St. David's for not having security bollards at the time. It also sparked a local ordinance in Austin that requires that safety step locally, and it also sparked a bill that is working its way through the legislature right now that would require the same safety step.
A lot of people recognizing that you found a real problem. Your reporting has found hundreds of these types of crashes. But one thing we didn't realize until now is that there was a second crash at another St. David's hospital.
Yeah, and this one occurred just 2 months after that deadly incident at St. David's North. This is just coming to light now. We learned about it from a source, but in April 10th of 2024, so the other one happened February 13th, so 2 months later, we now know from photos and surveillance video, 911 calls, that a nursing transit van had jumped the curb and crashed into the side of St. David's South Austin Medical Center. And at the time, employees there were very concerned about this. They had wrote to hospital officials that this was a very near miss, that there were physicians inside of a room. So there's photos showing this van right up against the wall next to a window and next to a seating area. And they were saying that, look, this was a very near miss. There were no bollards in this location, and there were physicians inside charting, working at the time. So employees inside were very concerned about what happened.
It's at St. David's South Austin Medical Center.
We've got a van that is leaning right up against a building.
The driver still is in there. We have some healthcare workers trying to get them out.
So again, we learned about that from a source, and as far as we know, no one was actually injured during that incident.
That's good to know. And I mean, one thing that was so interesting about your reporting is how you were able to really hear the inside chatter that hospital officials were having about this. You were able to get copies of some really telling emails from a top hospital official where she expressed concern over how close the hospital came to having a serious accident.
Yeah, I mean, hospital officials at the time had wrote to St. David's corporate folks and said, you know, there were no bollards in this location. They specifically mentioned that and asked for a bollard audit. They wanted a review, and St. David's officials wrote back and said, yes, we'll conduct a review. We'll see, you know, how many are needed, including the location where this crash happened. St. David's told us, you know, because of the nature of this type of crash, that bollards really wouldn't have made a difference. Though when we drove by there, we found more than 30 bollards in that area. They won't say when they were installed, but it appears that at least some of them were installed after this crash happened. So St. David's definitely responded to what happened and responded to the concerns from officials at that hospital. What we then did was we looked at other hospitals owned by HCA. So HCA is the parent company for St. David's. And we found in the past couple of years at least 5 crashes involving HCA-owned facilities. That includes the 2 crashes here in Austin last year. But a year before both of those crashes, on April 20th of 2023, there was another incident. This one appears to be intentional. It was at HCA Florida Osceola Hospital in Kissimmee. A woman, a patient at the time, over a medication dispute, she drove through the front entrance reversed, according to the police report, and then drove through again. And body camera video that we obtained shows the car wedged in that lobby, and she's crying and upset, saying, I just wanted my medication. But it raises questions. This incident and other ones that we found. There was another deadly incident that happened where a vehicle crashed into the wall of a hospital in Corpus Christi and a pregnant mother died. And all of these crashes, because they had happened at HCA-owned facilities, raises the question, should the hospital system have known that this was a risk, that this could have happened? Our own investigation found more than 20 deaths and more than 400 crashes involving medical sites across the country in the past decade. So experts say this is something that hospital systems should have known about, but St. David's parent company had an incident, in April of 2023 that for sure, police say appears that the driver was charged. Police say this was an intentional act. It appears that way. St. David's experts are saying, should have known that this was a risk. And had they have known about that, maybe there could have been bollards at St. David's North.
Well, if you're listening right now, we're here with Matt Grant, one of our investigators. When we get back from the break, we're going to talk more about what Matt found, including what was going on behind the scenes as council members were considering a new safety law sparked by the crash in your reporting. We'll see you when we get back from this commercial break. All right, thank you for joining us. We're here again with investigator Matt Grant talking about his investigation preventing disaster. So Matt, where we left off, you learned about this second crash that happened at another location that the St. David's Hospital System, HCA, owned. The second crash, though, it happened before the Austin City Council began considering an ordinance that would require bollards outside any of these newly built medical facilities. The question that I had when I was watching your story was, did they have information about this second crash when they were making these decisions?
No, they didn't. This right now is just coming to light. We learned about it from a source. We started doing some investigation into what happened. We were able to get photos and the 911 calls, which you heard before. So we were able to piece together what happened, but we're just learning about this now. This before was previously not known. So the city council was not aware of this particular incident, but they of course were aware of the one that happened just 2 months before this in February, the deadly incident at St. David's North. And that's the one where we had interviewed a family of 4, the Bernard family, who were seriously hurt in that crash, and their story and our findings that similar crashes have happened hundreds of times. That's what sparked the ordinance in Austin.
Okay, so you've got 2 crashes in a relatively small time frame. What does St. David's think at that point about an ordinance aimed at making their hospital safer?
At the time, St. David's was at least publicly neutral. They told us, we're going to comply with any new laws, rules, or regulations that may be passed. And that's really all they would tell us about it. What we now know from public records requests that we obtained, text messages and emails and phone call logs, is that and by St. David's now admission, they were opposed to the bollard ordinance all along.
So explain more about how these records show that they were really opposed to that ordinance the whole way through.
Yeah, so St. David's hired, they have been hiring an attorney and lobbyist. His name is Michael Whan. He's based in Austin. And on his website, he touts his ability to get changes before city commission, city council, and St. David's has been paying him. We don't know exactly how much, but disclosure forms say less than $10,000 every quarter. What we know is that Michael Whan, on St. David's behalf, was reaching out to at least 2 members of the city council while they were on the dais during that December 12th meeting. He was texting them, and he was also calling Councilmember Zoe Kadri's policy advisor, and the 2 of them spoke for almost a minute, just minutes before Councilmember Kadri said, I want to make a motion to postpone voting on and discussing this bollard ordinance. His policy advisor, after she got off the phone with Michael Whan, was texting him talking points. And some of those talking points he had actually read or appeared to be reading during the meeting, talking about what this will mean for renovations and rebuilds. And Michael Whan, after that vote, his motion did not pass. The ordinance did pass ultimately unanimously. And Michael Whan had texted Kadri afterwards saying, thanks for trying, and had also emailed the head of St. David's saying, despite his attempt to postpone, quote, at my request, the ordinance passed.
And a really interesting part of your story was when you actually went to Councilmember Kadri to ask him about these messages. Let's listen to that right now.
So it is accurate to say that Whan had reached out to our office about a postponement, but he wasn't the person carrying the water. He was one of many voices that had reached out.
So was your motion to postpone because he asked you or requested you do it?
That's something that I was going to bring forward regardless.
So we know that Michael Whan had texted Councilmember Kadri during the meeting. He said that the ordinance wasn't, quote, narrow enough, that it was a problem. After speaking with Whan, his policy advisor, again, had texted him some talking points. And we know that he also had texted Councilmember Paige Ellis, who did not respond to his text, but he told her that, the Planning Commission's desire to see this potentially expanded to include other facilities like daycare centers. We know there have been deadly incidents involving them around the country. He said that would be, quote, crazy and would create a fortified city. Good grief, feels like we need to breathe on this one. Councilmember Ellis did not respond. She did not agree with Councilmember Kadri's motion to postpone. She said she felt like this was a narrowly tailored ordinance and voted to let it continue to a vote, which it did, and it ultimately passed. She told me, look, it's not uncommon to hear from lobbyists about a number of issues, but ultimately it's up to each individual council member to make the best decisions that best serve their constituents.
So you've got all these messages that have gone back and forth. Neither of these council members deny that they were hearing from Whan, this lobbyist. Kadri saying, though, it didn't have an effect on what I did. Ultimately, I, voted my conscience and was in favor of this bill. But what's also interesting is that you tried to reach out to Michael Whan, this lobbyist, and walk us through your attempts to reach out to him over your time reporting.
Yeah, so Councilmember Kadri said, look, I would have voted to postpone this no matter whether Whan had contacted me or not. He said that he had his own concerns, which were raised to him by a member of the Planning Commission who told me that Michael Whan had also reached out to him. So we obviously had a lot of questions for Michael Whan. We started requesting an interview with him back in January. And for 2 months, we had requested interviews with him. We called him directly. St. David's spokesperson returned his phone call, said Michael Whan said, I should call you back. What's this regarding? We said we wanted to set up an interview. Through St. David's, we had requested an interview multiple times. St. David's ultimately sent us a statement back, which did not address our questions. They would not say if they even relayed our request to interview Michael Whan. They just said, this is all we can tell you at the time, just that he had been an attorney representing them on construction matters for a number of years. So we had a number of questions. We went to a recent city council where we knew that he was going to be at. He was talking about a development project. And after he got done talking, we found him and we had some questions that we were hoping he would answer.
Mr. Whan, Matt Grant with KXAN. Did St. David's direct you to stop the hospital bollard ordinance vote? You told St. David's leadership that you requested Councilmember Kadri postpone the vote. What did you mean by that? Why do you feel that improving safety at hospitals is a terrible policy? What did you mean when you texted Councilmember Ellis during the meeting that expanding the ordinance would create a fortified city and we need to breathe on this one?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
We have the text messages right here. I can print it out and show it to you. We want to get your side. Mr. Whan, please. This is about public safety.
Intense.
There you go. We were hoping he would have something to say.
Yeah, it's never fun when you're trying to get someone to talk to you, but you'd made lots of attempts to speak to him. Okay, but it's important to point out that nothing that Whan or Kadri did here is illegal.
No, lobbying is legal, and they register with the city, and you can go through and see their disclosure forms, so you can see every client that Michael Whan has and a number of other registered lobbyists in the city. This is legal, and it's no shock to folks that lobbying exists and that people try to get the ear of policymakers. But experts that we talk to, especially watchdog groups, Public Citizen in Austin is one of them, they say this really raises ethical questions and concerns, because if a member of the public wanted to talk about this issue, and at least one did that day, one resident did in support, there are channels to go through to get the ear of city council members. There's public comment. You can go up, you can talk for 3 minutes, you can say whether you support or oppose something and why, and the council can hear that and they can use that to weigh on their decision making. The questions that I think come up, and this really is a window into a world that's often hidden. Most members of the public do not get to see, how lobbying efforts work behind the scenes. But I think the ethical concerns that are being raised is, while members of the public have their channels to go through officially, they can register and sign up for public comment, Michael Whan was privately and discreetly texting members of the council while they were on the dais, minutes before they were set to discuss and vote on this issue, calling his policy advisor, Kadri's policy advisor, directly. She's then texting talking points to Kadri. I think, watchdog groups are concerned because they say, this is a blow to transparency, and it disrupts the process when the public doesn't get a full view of what's happening.
Well, you've certainly given us a much fuller view of how all of this happened, and we're looking forward to seeing more of your reporting. But Matt, you have a link in your story that allows people to explore information about lobbyists operating in Austin, including who they're working for. Both of these stories are online right now at kxan.com. You're reporting incredible as always, and revealing so much to us. For those of you who are listening or watching, we appreciate you. Don't forget to join us next Friday at 10:30 for Inside the Investigation. And you can also listen to KXAN's investigative podcast. It's highlighting some of our award-winning team's latest reports exposing corruption, safety concerns, system failures across Texas. The podcast will also feature audio versions of our weekly Inside the Investigation discussion with the journalists like Matt working on those stories. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.